Thank you, everybody. This is something to talk about from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. And we are looking at Braiding Sweetgrass. We have been working our way through the book. We're now going to be talking about burning sweetgrass, the section. And whether you've read it or not, I think you'll find something valuable here to pick up on. And I want to start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have been the stewards of the lands and waters along the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We're grateful for them. And so this is a wonderful book to be talking about because it looks at the connections between Indigenous history and modern reactions. And of course, Indigenous people are not of the past, they are of the present as well. And nobody better than Robin Kimmerer to tell us about that. Something to Talk About is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers assisted and independent living along with memory care on the tranquil Rolling Bay campus. They also have day stay and respite programs. Email Ashley C. at fieldstonecommunities.com. Check out the website at fieldstonecommunities.com or call 206-594-1010 or just stop by for a tour today. Ann Lovejoy has been helping us, and she is in the conference room with a couple of our regulars. Martha is there and Rita is there. And so thank you, Ann, and everyone who's here today for our conversation.
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up. It's always a richer conversation with more voices, right? I really congratulate all of you who've made it this far. We're almost to the finish line. This book gets richer and deeper the deeper you dig. And I gotta say, this last section is probably the most challenging and difficult because it's really painful reading, or a lot of it. I don't know about you, but a lot of times it made me cry. And not necessarily in a cozy, warm, good way, right? I mean, this is hard stuff, but it's also beautiful and so full of astonishing hope. I mean, that's the part that really amazes me with a lot of tribal elders who speak from this amazing viewpoint of deep past and a lot of trauma, and then also definitely very present and hopeful. So I'm curious if anyone, like while you were reading this, was there anything that kind of stuck with you or that you really had to stop and think about, or you went and looked something up to learn more about it? Anything like that? Do you want to say?
So I really found this section difficult to read. And I haven't finished it, so I'm hoping there's a lot more hope and a little left farther along.
Yeah, there is. There is.
You know, it was really, I was squirming reading about the lake and just the depth of pollution and degradation, and then hearing about the is it the Ona? No, I'd have to look at it. The tribe that starts Onondaga,
yeah.
Onondaga, yeah. So how they finally had their court case dismissed, rather than I mean, like, what do you do? And so the author keeps saying, but we have so much strength. We have so much strength and endurance and resilience and so on. And, you know, considering what they've been through, it's kind of amazing that they haven't completely assimilated. And I think we're pretty lucky that they have been able to maintain their vision and with wisdom about the earth. So I guess that's where the hope comes in. That guess what? Even though we tried to wipe them out, we did not succeed. And maybe that's where some of the strength comes from. I don't know.
Well, and one thing to think about is that this book was written in 2013 or published in 2013 and written over a number of years before that. Right. And that actually since then there has been progress on that cleanup. The EPA is involved I mean, I'm not saying they fixed it all yesterday because they didn't, but at least it's, even though that court case got dismissed, it didn't stop there because they didn't stop standing up for the water. And so things have been moving slowly, but moving.
There was a couple, there was a couple things that came to mind. Earlier this week, or last week anyway, it was last week, there was this little thing that I saw, and I think it kind of goes with this. I think it does. And it's, I'll read it. It's called Peacemaking. And I think it really ties in with a lot of things, but it kind of ties in with this. Peacemaking is the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice. The act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. The act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that is big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. It's from a book called Common Prayer, a liturgy for radicals. So I just happened to, I saw that last week, and then I was reading this, and I think that can just be used in so many ways. And it was interesting that when we're reading this last chapter, she's talking about them bombing Baghdad 2013, and now we've got, Israel and Palestine and all this being bombed. It's so relevant. But this peacemaking thing just really struck me, and just something to really think about. I'm going to print this and hang it up in my house so I can remember to be a peacemaker.
Print several copies.
I will. So that's kind of what I took, and I just thought part of that was all relevant, especially when she was talking about the bombing of Baghdad, and now here we are bombing again and totally destroying stuff that just makes me, I can't. It's beyond words, but there's hope because peace can come about forever. We are going to be, I am hopeful forever. And we're not giving up.
Barbara, you had something you wanted to bring.
Well, it was the language that was cited about the beginning of the lawsuit, and it says the Onondaga people wish to bring about a healing between themselves and all others who live in this region that has been the homeland of the Onondaga Nation since the dawn of time. So it's a lawsuit that begins with an expression of healing and inclusion for everybody that's living there with them. And I thought, why, that's not typical language in litigation. And it just talks about the worldview of we're all in this together, we're responsible, here's how we're trying to be responsible together for the harm that has been done.
Which definitely ties right into what.
Right, it's like the peacemaking thing. I just go, when I read that, I go, oh, wait, I have this other thing here. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, it's awesome. And it is about peacemaking, which is the only way we're going to get to where we want to be.
Well, and that the Common Prayer book may well have been influenced by the Onondagan, got some of their amazing, the documents that they've put together for hundreds of years, if not thousands, right, of peace being a really important cultural goal and a hard one, right? I was thinking a lot about I actually went to Costco the other day, and it made me think about the, what do you call it? The Windigo part of ourselves, where you walk into a place where it's like floor to ceiling, literally millions of pieces of stuff, right? And just thinking about the culture that wants masses of stuff and they want it cheap and they want it now, right? And I was there, actually with Rita. But the point is, it's so easy to be a materialist in our culture. It's just so easy. It's a click. If you're on your computer, you can click something and not even step foot out of your house and have whatever you want. One of the UPS drivers told me recently that there are houses he goes to every single day. Every single day. there are houses that are getting something. And that, I think that is something, it's like, it's so difficult for us to get past that.
Looking for the phone.
Looking for the phone,
That would be Windigo giving us a call.
right? Saying, why are you trying to get rid of me when I'm right here in your pocket? But
I have
isn't
something more interesting to talk about than what you're talking about.
it right? There's a sale for Thanksgiving, right? It's like, we're just so acculturated to more and more and more. And it's just been coming up a lot in my life of like not trying to do more, not trying to make things bigger and better, but to say, what if things are smaller? What if they're smaller and they're better smaller?
Well, too, I was thinking about, this reviving, and I'm thinking about just even here on Bainbridge, they're working on Pritchard Park, and that's been a long thing. But the Springbrook, over on Springbrook there in Fletcher Bay, they've taken out a culvert so the fish can pass through, and we're putting in these other things. And so you look at all again, at the big world, but when we look locally, even here on Bainbridge, there is a lot that is being done every single day by so many groups to really help. And that again gives me hope as well. I think we sometimes get so caught up in the hugeness of all this and the impossibility that it seems that it's just impossible. And yet, if we can work in our own little neighborhood, in our own little block, it's amazing how much can get done and how much is accomplished. And so I was just thinking about that on Bainbridge, how many things are going on. Moritani Preserve is having a work thing. There's the land trust. There's so many opportunities for us to participate, and there's so many things that are being done just where we live to make our lives better, that to me, it's very hopeful.
That one of the things she said in this chapter, Kimmerer says in this chapter, is it's important to choose joy over despair because that's what earth gives us daily, and we must return the gift. It's like our gratitude and our joyfulness is part of the gift of giving back to the earth, because it's more sustainable than despair, which is enervating, and it robs me anyway, of my sense of agency.
Right. That really struck me too. Yeah, that was helpful to read. Yes.
The other thing I thought was really interesting is she said in a longer way than this, Windigo tries to trick us into thinking that belongings will fill our huge empty hole, right? The gap. This isn't exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but it's belonging that people are hungry for. It's belonging, not belongings. And that piece I thought was really powerful. And that's again, like your community sense, like what we do together builds our sense of hope because we see there are other like-minded people who really do want to make a difference and be the change, right?
I also thought it was very interesting when she started talking about the rituals that they do for the salmon or for the grasses or for whatever, and honoring and respecting, and as a community together voicing their commitment, right? Their expectations, commitments. And then she says, but that doesn't mean that others should join us in our ceremonies, but have their own ceremonies. Do you remember reading that?
Yeah, yes.
I thought that was interesting because I don't know. I just think it's really interesting. Can we create parallel rituals and ceremonies? I guess we have them, through churches, or we're honoring the seasons, or, but it seems like it would be a good idea for the different elements of our culture, the peoples of our culture, to also find ways to honor our world together, other than maybe, honoring those who died in a war, or, different kinds of like Christian ceremonies or whatever, but maybe collective ones. I wonder, without, taking over someone else's ritual or symbolism. I don't know how we do that, but I was just thinking, in the context of helping all people and accepting all people who live in the land, would there be a way to find develop shared rituals, shared honorings? I mean, there's Earth Day, but yeah, anyway, I had that thought.
Yeah, one day doesn't really seem like it's enough.
Well, no. But anyway, ways to recognize one another, recognize together the animacy, the reciprocity, the responsibility, the gratitude for our land.
It kind of makes me think of the last chapter section where the native elder said, these colonists have one foot on the boat and one foot in the land. And that because of that, we have never really developed a real culture except from materialism and more and more and more, right? That's but take, right? It's not rooted in a culture of gratitude and appreciation for what is. It's rooted in, there is, in some of our Thanksgiving events and so forth, there's a kind of gratitude, but it's like, thanks for giving us so much so that we can overeat and over drink and watch TV and have a football game, or I don't know, but it's not gratitude to the earth. It's not a recognition of our place, because I think as a culture, we don't really feel our place to be part of nature.
Well, I think,
Go ahead.
well, I think sometimes too, because of where we live, sometimes if you're raised in the middle of a city, if you're raised in the city, you don't always understand that. Or I don't think what I'm saying. You kind of, that's not always at the forefront, depending. But I think that as we become more aware, and even as we just do a little planting, whether it be a few daffodils in a pot sitting out on our porch, or something small, that we see that. And I think different, we live at the edges, and so there's a lot in between. But I just really, again, I am hopeful that people are saying, no, this is not how we want to do this, and that we are going to make things better for the whole world. For our earth, because otherwise we're not going to be here. And I think that a lot of the young people have kind of taken a hold of that and are much more aware at such a younger age than we are, or were. Yeah.
Well, also, I think that there's there's a pure sort of response that when you're not connected to the money part of our world,
Mm-hmm.
that when you're a kid, this looks like, of course, it just makes sense. But then you aren't, mostly, not all children, obviously, but many young people are unconcerned about there's plenty.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting fed tonight, most of them. And so it's easy to sort of see things the way they are when you aren't focused on the scarcity. One of the things that comes to mind to me is the Lakota Sioux, were offered, I think, I don't know, several $1 million in exchange for the um, unwarranted taking of the Black Hills, which they see as sacred. And they refused the money.
Okay.
I mean, they said, I think it's probably worth billions of dollars now. And they say it's not for sale. It's not, you can't just take it and then give us cash back, because they're not equivalent. And the 1 foot on the boat, 1 foot on the land, it's like, well, no, it's an equivalent. I'm giving you plenty of money.
Right.
Doesn't that also loop back, that's sort of a similar sentiment, loop back to what Anne was saying, Earth Day. So it almost seems like having Earth Day is enough for us to observe it Earth Day, and then, you know, the rest of the year it's kind of in the back of our minds, but we don't really do anything about it. So it's almost like that one day a year makes us feel good about our lack of effort, our lack of commitment.
Kind of like Mother's Day.
Kind of like Mother's Day. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it is Mother's Day. I mean, Earth Day, right? Earth, the sky, a mom. I think part of like Rita said, if you don't grow up with access to nature, and maybe there's a park at the corner of your street, maybe there isn't, maybe it's actually just a dirt patch. Maybe you don't feel like you have a big connection to the natural world, but that disconnection is so harmful to us as humans.
It is.
It's like we really need to be in connection with the land. I like that part where she talks about the land had 5 meanings. I don't know if I can find it in my notes now, but do you remember that? Where she's like, the land is just real estate, then there's no spiritual home. And if its land is capital, then the Black Hills are worth a couple $1 million. Thanks, right? If land is property, you can do whatever you want with it, right? If it's a machine, then you engineer solutions. Like that kind of cracked me up, that thing about, I know, we'll plant willows, we'll plant thousands and thousands of willows, and then we'll cut them down. And it's like, okay, but you still don't have anything like what you had. I mean, it is a step, I suppose. Does anyone else think about Eagle Harbor being a cleanup site and how that EPA process has been limping along for decades now, right?
Mhm.
We don't even think about it or talk about it all that much, but I know there are people who do, who walk along the shore and mourn that there are no more starfish or hardly any, or that there's fewer fish, there's like, who see the degradation in ways that maybe you don't if you weren't here 20, 30, 40 years ago and saw a richer environment. Maybe you don't mourn what you never knew.
Well, when I first moved here in 2007, I couldn't believe that Eagle Harbor was a Superfund site. I mean, and I'm going, holy schmoly. I was pretty amazed. And then the other thing that I found interesting that she wrote about science, that science knows there's so much going on, but they don't write it in a way that even she can really digest it very well. So it's not out there where it's accessible to people who might want to go, instead of writing all this stuff, let's just say, this is doing this is doing this. And I think that's part of it too, that the scientists know a lot that's going on, but it's not shared in a relevant way that a lot of people can get it or get interested in it or go, oh, that's what's really going on. They see this thing about the environment and they go, I'm not reading that because I'm not going to be able to understand it. I found that very interesting. That she said that she couldn't eat. She said she didn't eat. It was hard even for her to read. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well.
It's like scientists are a private priesthood and they only talk in their own language to each other.
Ooh.
Exactly. It is. It is a lot of times. And they have all these congressional reports, they spend all this money to do all these studies and all this stuff, and do we ever find out? So it's in a format that we can read and understand and maybe say, not really.
I wonder if that's partly why there's so much distrust in science on the part of
Could be.
some people.
Mhm.
Joan, did you want to jump in? I see you pointing your
I-
finger. Let me hear you.
I was just thinking about there's another sector where that happens is with laws and regulations. They're written in such a way that it can be really hard to unwind what's being said there.
Exactly.
It's almost like someone doesn't want us to fully understand or have a lot of people to have a greater understanding of the concepts.
Well, traditionally, priesthoods have not wanted to demystify the thing they were in charge of. You don't have as much power if other people understand it, right?
Right, exactly.
Joan Burwell, how about you?
Okay, I think if we would just be adults enough to just walk around and appreciate it ourselves and say to heck with the rest of the world, just love it fully. It just amazes me on this island how everybody wants to do everything and spend all this money and do all this kind of stuff. And lo and behold, we've got it now. Why do we need more? Next door to me, they took a field, an open field, and now they're building on it. They took poor Canadian geese. They can't even come down and eat or anything. They used to go over my deck and I'd say, goodbye, don't leave anything. And they respect me all the time. They talk back to me. But anyhow, it's just amazing to me. But we just got to learn to be adults and appreciate it ourselves and let the rest of the world drag on behind us and see our example. That's all I have to say.
Well, Barbara, you could probably say something to that. You've been really working hard to be an example for certain many things.
I could say so much about that. I'm really trying not to. Well, something that occurred to me when Joan was talking about taking down trees, and I thought immediately of all the hoo-ha that arises when trees are cut down for development here, which I totally get and I respect it. But I think how many of those people that are outraged are also driving these big SUVs with, leather dashboards made from cowhide in sacrifice from cows grown in sacrificed Amazon forests. So that's a little snark out of my system.
Well, but that really helps out the interconnectedness, right? The intersectionality of all this.
Yeah. Each of our choices that we make every day contributes either in a positive way or a negative way to what's going on. And that's in terms of our interactions with each other or the earth or our consumption patterns. I mean, it's all interconnected. And, we just don't make those connections as often. I love she talked about the definition of waste, which of course, as a verb, it means to render the valuable useless, to diminish, to dissipate, and to squander. And, this is sort of picking up on something from last time, which is if you don't recognize the life that something came from, it has no value to you. And it's just to be trashed. Anyway, anybody else have anything to say?
Thank you, dear. That was perfect.
How about you, Sheila?
I was so taken with her 7 fires and the 8th fire and the importance of being a spark, which is essentially what we've been talking about here. To be the spark. And it doesn't have to be to win over the entire world. Like Joan was saying, that we could just be ourselves and do the very best we can for ourselves and to teach. There's a whole lot to being an elder is to teach the people that are coming along. And the excitement that I have when I am with my great grandchildren who are 10 and 4, they get it. They get it. They really do get it. They live out in Wisconsin, and they get that which is lovely. And my grandchildren get it, and it's love. I've got one grandchild, Josh, who is works in the Riverside Park out in New York City, along the banks of the river, and his job is a gardener. He gets it. He absolutely gets what's going on, and works hard at it. And he has developed his own website called True Leaves, which you can look up, trueleaves.com. And he has all kinds of information that he works on with that. There's the sparks. Those are the sparks, you see, for me anyway.
I wonder how many people feel the despair and just give up and don't even look anymore and are so distant. I wonder, how giant that is. But yet inside they still feel that what's missing and know that it's missing and maybe even know what it is, but don't have a way to get to it because, well, maybe they are so busy or whatever. And so this has been kind of inspiring for me to kind of reawaken my awareness of how I live and, the impact of the way I live. And like you were saying about the spark and the sparks, maybe on average, I think people don't think about these things or don't feel that there's anything they can do about it. But I wonder if, with a little more sparking, that more of those latent optimism would be awakened. So I guess I appreciate your comments about the sparks.
Yeah, it's really difficult when we know very well that, the hugest polluter on earth is the US military, for instance. And, all these corporations that are dumping stuff into not just Onondaga Lake, but many, many lakes all over, in Washington back in, 20 years ago, there was a study that showed that every major waterway in Washington state was polluted with pesticides and fertilizers. Every major waterway in Washington state, right? And here we are, kind of emerald, the green state, right? And yet it's like lawn chemicals, a lot of it too. And part of it, it's like that whole thing of being divorced from nature because we buy that European culture thing of the hand of man. Like if you can't see the hand of man on the property or on the garden or on the park, then something's wrong, something's missing, right? And we're not seeing beauty, we're seeing mess or randomness. God forbid there should be randomness, right? But I think learning to open our eyes and helping each other kind of be more comfortable with real nature. Nature doesn't do straight lines. Nature has never developed a cubic plant.
But we can get there because my son-in-law is a rocket scientist. He's an engineer.
Yes.
And he likes stuff and he's got some nice property. And so we've got some of it kind of manicured, but I told him, I said, the rest you can't, we got to leave it at that. And he's getting much better at having a little bit of wildness, really, really improved. So, so it's good. It's good. There's hope for all of us.
Maybe the reduction in sales of leaf blowers will be an indicator that we're getting the clue.
Oh, no.
One thing that struck me too was when she talked about how parts of the horrible, that white wasteland were starting to be infiltrated. She saw a few little goldenrods and some asters and some this and some that, right? And how under the birches the birches are first because they're kind of pioneers in that part of the country, it'd be like alders are here. And because the birds perch in the birch trees and drop their seeds, then the fruiting berries start appearing, and the communities build themselves out of desolation. And it made me think about Mount St. Helens and how in those first years, there was nothing, just nothing. And then I started seeing scientists posting about how the land was starting, deep ash, right? And then here would come paintbrush, Indian paintbrush, or here would come Douglas fir seedlings. Here would come mushrooms. Those fungi are under everything, weaving their way around. And it's like the environment will heal itself if we can just get out and stop. If we stop the active harm, nature can not necessarily restore what was there. It's been figured out that like in the rainforest, it takes about 300 years to recover the kind of the richness and diversity that was there before it was clear cut to make room for the cattle that provided the leather for the seats in the Mercedes, right? Or whatever. But you can start with the pioneer plants and they bring with them other plants. I was thinking too about, maybe I've told this story before, but when I was in Costa Rica working with this eco team, they were building a children's museum in San Jose and they were doing life zones because Costa Rica's right between, South and Central America, and it's got the richest number of life zones anywhere in the world. And the second richest is Washington State's rainforest, okay, just to give you an idea. But they were rebuilding some of the life zones around this little museum, and it's only been there 3 years at this point, right? And one of the scientists was telling us this story and like started to cry and said, there are species of birds and creatures here we haven't seen in 100 years. And because the plants are here, the birds are here. Because the birds are here, right? And it was like, nature wants to heal. It's a very strong. I have great faith that if we manage to erase the human race off the face of the earth will become amazing again in a whole new way, probably. But that gives me hope too. But I think that image of the few straggly little plants and the irony of being the ones she starts the book with, right? Like, why aren't these beautiful? And getting teased by scientists who freak out at the thought of beauty, right? That's just not scientific. And yet here she's kind of bringing this whole thing back with like, here's my goldenrod, here's my asters,
Here's my dandelions.
Yeah.
To dandelions a
Right?
lot, I
The
know.
colonial gift is the dandelion and the dock and the, right, Himalayan blackberries, which are really European, and the ivy, right? All that stuff will come too. But maybe that's the new mix.
Morning glory.
Morning glory. We have 3 species of native morning glory, but they're kind of small and none of them are like, whoa, the European morning glory, now that's a taker. I've actually had people say, oh, that's so pretty. I see it along the roadside. Could I transplant some of that in my garden? And you're like, that is not a good idea.
Oh, Burwell.
Yes, I think about when I first came here, I used to walk on the side of the city hall. And alongside of the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the building itself, lo and behold, there were strawberry vines. And I'm wondering where that came from. Well, the longer I'm living here and the more history about this island, I can imagine in comparison to the whole world, what they've done to the island in the last, 30 years that I know of, that I've been coming here. And lo and behold, they're still doing that, and they're doing it all over the world. I just say we have to stop and we have to listen more. We have to stand there and we have to look at it and appreciate it. And thank God that we're here. And when we go on, we can look down and say, I listened.
Maybe listening can become part of the new ritual. Like Anne was saying, we might have to make up our own. Maybe every time you plant something, you say, thank you. Thank you to the soil, to the plant itself, right? And we become very aware that we're inviting life to come and live with us, right?
Yes.
If we start looking at things with that kind of recognition and gratitude, it will certainly change the way we treat our garden and our plants.
And if you have a crow in the neighborhood, tell him to go on and eat whatever he wants to. I watch that a lot up there because the kids, they leave things, and they'll come along, the crow come along and see if it's any good. And if it isn't any good, they just leave it and keep going on down the road. But I just think, let's just be in the moment and be in the world ourselves, and maybe eventually it'll happen with the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think for most of us, we're not really given the opportunity to solve enormous problems, but we can solve small ones, and we can, like you said, Rita, start right where you are with your own garden, with your neighborhood, with maybe a park, or you could come down to the senior center and help me and Rita. We would welcome you. But really, like taking care of the piece of the planet that we're standing on or that we're living on. One thing that's really fascinating me lately is rewilding. That there's, like, for instance, when you think about 1 foot on the boat and 1 foot on the land, those colonists were people who had completely clear-cut Scotland, for instance, in the 1400s. And it's never really grown back in many places. Large parts of England were completely clear-cut. It wasn't like they came here without knowing how to destroy. They were pretty good at it by then, right? And the hand of man concept is like all about shaping nature to show that who's in charge, and it's not nature, it's, the guy with the clippers, right? But the thing that we might think about is like how to rethink that relationship, which is, I think, what Robin Kimmerer is talking about over and over and over and over, reciprocity, right? And gratitude. Thinking about how we can rewild even a little tiny patch. And what's amazing to me is if you do that, even if it's just like in the alley where you keep your garbage can or something, let plants grow up there and you will see an amazing number of pollinators all summer long, right? You will see, maybe you'll get lucky and you'll see there's a toad or there's a frog or there's tons of little birds that come to eat the seeds. There's butterflies and moths. You'll see, yeah, there you go. You'll see a whole nother way to be.
This is a suggestion from John of an article from Down East. Anne Lovejoy is another woman who wants to destroy your lawn, but
Yes, true.
Indeed.
I like to think of it as not destroying the lawn so much as enriching the environment. And Rita, I don't know if you saw, I sent you a link from Becky Fitch, whose grandchildren are members of the Potawatomi Nation. And it's an NPR story of about an hour that talks about what the Potawatomi people are doing today and how the kids are getting raised up in the tradition of gratitude and connection. Did you see that?
no. Sorry, I'll go look for it.
Yeah, you can probably find it. But I just thought it was interesting that, everything we read about what's so bad in this book, I'm not denying that it's so bad, it is, but it was also 10 years ago, right? That it came out. And even though the incremental changes are not huge necessarily, there are many, many of them. If you think about this past decade, the strides that have been made in solar, for instance, replacing a lot of coal. Yeah, there you go. This is a really beautiful little documentary. If you want to look it up and spend a happy hour this evening watching it. And you might get a glimpse of Becky Fitch's grandson, who's a little redheaded tribal member. Really sweet. But yeah, I think we can get really fixed on the destruction and devastation, which are very, very real, but it's really good to remember the seeds of hope as well, to see the progress, to see how people are doing things differently today, even in a decade. And we should last so long, maybe in another decade, there'll be even better things.
So we're talking about, well, most little things, but the birds come and feed and so forth, and little seedlings are dropped from the sky and are carried in, the like. And a few minutes ago, I was thinking about those bunnies that weren't around 5 years ago, that now they're en masse. And I also remember, last summer, I planted these perfect little, or not perfect, but they were just right for where I was putting them, let's say. And before I knew it, they were like just little grassy, almost like a little, only the leaves were left a few. And I went to Bay Hay one day and I said, could you please tell me what, so many of the plants, they'll say deer resistant and, all this and good pollinators, and which ones would be good for bunnies? Or so the bunnies wouldn't eat them is what I said. And then the lady laughed at me, but, kindly, and we were both laughing by then. And then deer, for years, probably for the first 20 years, we were on the little house we have and the property there, we never had deer, but I made a point never to tell anybody that we didn't. There was something about when somebody would talk about, oh, the deer come in, so we have to net things up or do whatever they were doing. And I would never say we didn't have deer. And, but once in a while, they do wander through now, but the bunnies are much quicker.
Yeah, and that balance, I think we all remember, well, maybe not, but back in the day, pretty much all the rabbits on the island were up in Battle Point Park. And they were mostly descendants of rabbits that people had as pets. And when the kids went up to college, the parents would take the rabbits to Battle Point and dump them. And then they developed these flourishing colonies. And then the coyotes would move back in, and that would kind of take care of the of the rabbits for a while. But then the coyotes would get parvovirus, and then, right, so there were these cycles of like, the rabbits would swell again. But these rabbits that we're seeing a lot of in these last few years are actually native rabbits that have been apparently introduced. In the south end of the island, there's mink from the old mink farm that were released when the mink farm shut down. So there's actually quite a lot of mink on the island too. But, all these animals have found great places to live, and a lot of them happen to be our gardens, because we're making, salad bars or smorgasbords, right?
It's a buffet.
Yeah, right.
Organic buffet.
Well, like I said, when I first came to the island in 2007, I'd plant flowers and do stuff, but I didn't live out in the wild. And so we were renting this little house, and I thought for my daughter, I got a bunch of pots, and I put all this beautiful stuff in it so that, when she came back in a week, she would be surprised, and she would walk up this beautiful little path with all these flowers. And I went out like 2 days later, and I looked at this, and I go, what happened? Something's the matter here. And it took me a minute, because I'd not been around deer or stuff. And those deer had come in and gone, oh, thank you so much, Rita. So then she was coming home in 2 days. I had to go to the nursery and get some deer resistant plants. And luckily that kind of worked, because it doesn't always work. But again, not knowing, because I hadn't been around deer, and not knowing that, it's one of those things you learn. And depending where we live, we learn all kinds of different things.
Well, and I think
one of the things that I know that Anne, you talk about on your gardening show on Wednesdays once a month, is the idea of recognizing that there are things that are going to be enticing and we don't want to exclude the wildlife.
No.
But we want to think about, when we're setting things up, what's appropriate planting and leaving space for that. So if we have tasty things around the perimeter of our property, animals are as lazy as we are. If there's something good to eat there, they'll probably stop and eat there.
And why not? I think it's interesting that I don't think Dr. Kimmerer mentions deer at all in her book.
She does not.
Yeah, she does not. But then she's also growing, she talks a lot about corn and squash and tomatoes, none of which are particularly interesting to deer. I think that she probably doesn't really have a lot of raccoons either, though she probably has groundhogs. Mm-hmm. But, depending on where you live in the country and where you're trying to garden and what you're trying to grow, you'll find a lot of different options of sharing. Joan, did you want to say something? Joan Burwell?
That's very true, Anne, because when you think of different places where you live, like there's moles back in Indiana. We lived in the country and the moles would get up and they, you know, kill your grass because they were going through and all that kind of underground. And then you come out to Montana and lo and behold, what have we got? We live in Three Forks is the headwaters of the Missouri. So there's those three rivers. And well, you watch out for the rattlesnake in case he's in your driveway someday.
Right?
And then you come out here and you see and you learn all of this stuff. It's amazing. I love it. I love life.
I liked that chapter about collateral damage. I've read about this before, about in the seasons when very vulnerable little animals like salamanders and toads are trying to cross the road, and they do it at night and trying to stop the traffic. And actually, I've read that since the writing of this, there have been now some arranged times when the roads are impassable, like they block the roads off for the few hours of the night when the critters are crossing. Because of if you read that part, she talks about how these graduate students were kind of collecting data on how many got killed, what percentage, and how tricky that was, and how they'd mess things up by rescuing all these animals that probably would have got killed. But anyway, there was enough information gleaned that people did actually start recognizing that they needed to do something. And so there were, in various parts of New England where these annual migrations occurred, there were roadblocks put up for the few nights where they were needed. So again, you know, some of the things that we read that are just so heartbreaking have actually been mitigated at least a little bit here and there, right? I mean, that's hopeful, and that's community. That's people getting together and saying, we want to do something about this, even if it's just small, right?
Yep.
I used to break for frogs.
Yeah.
It would drive at night in New England. It would drive my husband crazy, but I would break for frogs. You know, and it's not like they were around all year long, but in that mating season, they would be crossing from one, you know, temporary pond to another, and they were crossing the road like mad some nights. So that's fun to remember that.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to kind of touch on before we wind up is when she talks about the hunter-gatherer society as the original affluent society where all needs are met by the land. And I thought, wouldn't that be an interesting topic to bring up in a community conversation? Because I think so many contemporary urban people think of hunter-gatherer subsistence living as bleak and horrible. And yet, if it's full of story and song, full of relationship, full of bounty, full of reliable cycles, which of course nature isn't always reliable, but it sounds, you know, it sounds to me like if that's the basis which most of humanity developed in, which I think pretty much was, pretty sure there was no Amazon 5 million years ago or even 3,000 years ago, right? Hunter-gatherer subsistence cultures really shaped who we are today, whether we know it or not. And today's culture is about scarcity in ways that are so bizarre because we've never had so much abundance. And yet the fear of scarcity makes people stockpile. She talks about, you know, grain that rots because it's been over-harvested and stored and not used because the people who need it can't afford it, right? So the craziness of our culture that doesn't understand equitable distribution or response to need, right? Take what you need, take only what you need and leave the rest. Barbara?
The illusion of scarcity in this culture, despite all our abundance, I think is driven so much by, you know, the consumerism. get it now. There's only 5 left, call right now, order it right now. And it's like, it's sad, but it's there. And I think that contributes to our sense, even now, of people saying, oh, the economy is so terrible. And I think, is it? That isn't my experience. Where does that come from? And also a mindset of fear, get your alarms, get your personal alarms when you're old and feeble, and then there's that whole thing. So we really have to question these messages that are being foisted on all of us.
All of which are about buying something.
Yep, that'll make it better. Whatever it is, there's a product for it.
Remember, you can always turn it off.
Yep.
That's true.
Anybody got a last thing they want to contribute or talk about or bring up?
Well, what did people think about the God creating man? And at first he was ugly, and then he or she was something else, and then finally with no heart, and eventually created with a heart, and then put on blinders. I'm gonna have to read that section again. Do you remember that?
The Mayan,
Right.
Yeah.
that Mayan one.
Right.
Yeah. How the corn people had to be blinded or they would just be standing in the light and not doing anything, I think was the point. But yeah, that Mayan story, I think that could use a little depacking.
Yeah.
We're going to get together again in a couple weeks and do the epilogue and maybe talk about people of the corn, people of the light, which is the section that Anne is referring to now.
Oh, did I get ahead? Okay.
No,
No,
you didn't.
no,
You
it's
didn't
good.
get ahead. We're just running out of time.
Okay, Monday. Rats. I'll have to remember I'm in San Francisco on Monday. No, I'm back. Never mind. I'm
You're just flying everywhere, right?
yeah.
We'll be
I'm
meeting on the
working-
27th.
Yes. Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, and at that one, I was going to bring some native plant books and maybe my braid of sweetgrass and some other stuff to look at and talk about. If anybody wants to bring a book or a thought or something that it would be great if we all could kind of come to it and say, how has this conversation changed the way we think? Or how is this changing the way I'm living in the world? Or how does this shift my worldview? And if we could do that together, I think that would be a really rich wrap up. And I'm eager to hear what everybody, and this goes for all of you who are listening in later when maybe you didn't have a chance to be here for this, but you're going to hear it later in the week. Please email your thoughts to Reed or me, and we will read them out and include them because I want to hear from other people as well. And I'm aware we have about 400 people who have been looking at these things. So that's a lot of voices to bring into the conversation. And thank you, everybody.